I thought I'd seen it all, until I encountered the world of the rich. I never considered myself poor. I had a decent job, my own apartment, even if it was on a mortgage, and I could afford a vacation once a year in Spain or Greece. I lived like most of my friends in London. Work, pub on Fridays, renting a car for the weekends. Nothing special, but no unnecessary drama either. And then one day, life led me to a place where I realized we ordinary people have no idea what money is truly capable of. I'm not talking about luxurious villas on the French Riviera or yachts that everyone has seen on Instagram. I'm talking about expenditures that knock the ground out from under your feet because they're so absurd and ridiculous that your first instinct is to laugh. And the second is to ask, seriously, you paid for that? How it all started. 5 years ago, I worked at a small consulting firm that dealt with lifestyle management, essentially helping rich people with their daily lives. Imagine a personal assistant but an entire team ready to fulfill the strangest requests. At first, I thought it would involve booking restaurants, organizing parties, or managing real estate. But I quickly realized, the more money people have, the more absurd their desires become. First encounter, a house for the dog. My first assignment seemed harmless. A wealthy couple from Monaco asked to find an architect to build a separate house for their dog. I thought they meant a dog house, but when they showed me the sketch, I nearly choked on my coffee. It was a real mini palace on 3 floors with a marble staircase, a hydrotherapy pool, and a built-in climate control system. Yes, for the dog. And the dog was just an ordinary French bulldog, not some rare breed worth millions. They spent about 2.5 million euros on this project. And you know what's strangest? The dog still preferred to sleep in their bed. Private jet for dinner. A couple of weeks later, another client from Geneva wanted real pasta from Naples. Not pasta in a restaurant, but specifically from a particular restaurant he used to go to as a student. And instead of just flying there himself, he sent a private jet with a pilot to bring the order back to Switzerland. The cost of the round-trip flight, fuel, and crew work, about 30,000 euros. For pasta that cost a maximum of 20 euros in the restaurant. I remember us standing in the office debating, would he at least eat it warm, or would he reheat it in the microwave? Not the right shade of champagne. The most comical case was at a woman's birthday party in Paris. Everything was perfect, decorations, lighting, food. But at some point she noticed that the champagne looked too yellow in photos. Not the taste, not the brand, the shade of the bubbles. She demanded that all the bottles be replaced with another brand. That night, we called half of Paris looking for the right champagne. We spent about 150,000 euros just to change the drink for the sake of pretty photos. And the most absurd part, the guests were already so drunk that they couldn't care less what they were drinking. Insurance for sneakers. One young client from London was obsessed with his sneaker collection. He had a room that looked more like a museum, lighting, glass display cases, security system. But he went even further. He got separate insurance just for his shoe collection. The annual cost of the insurance exceeded the price of a good house somewhere in the suburbs. And you know what struck me the most? He rarely wore those sneakers himself. For him, it was more a status symbol. Look, I can afford not to wear them. When money erases reality. With each new client, I understood more clearly, wealth doesn't make people normal. It distorts their perception of reality. For us ordinary people, a purchase is always a choice. We think, do I need this? Will I have enough money for something else? They don't have that question. And when limitations disappear, people start buying not just things, but emotions, experiences, and even a basic sense of control. And then one day, I encountered a story that forever changed my attitude toward wealth. Because it's one thing to see absurd expenditures. It's another when you realize that behind all those millions lies something much emptier and more unsettling. At some point, I realized rich people spend money not on things, but on the illusion of control over everything around them. And the more money they have, the more they want to erase even the slightest discomfort. Sometimes it looked funny and sometimes frightening. Therapist for the cat. Once I worked with a couple from London. They had a Maine Coon named Oliver. The cat lived better than half my acquaintances. Special furniture, organic food, a heated bed. But one day, the owner noticed that Oliver looked sad. A week later, the cat had a personal therapist. Sessions were held once a week via Zoom because it's less stressful that way. The woman was really paying a licensed psychologist over £1,000 an hour to work on the emotional state of her pet. I was at one of those sessions. The psychologist sat with a stone face. The owner voiced the feelings of the cat, and the specialist suggested play practices to relieve anxiety. The whole time I was thinking, and if this psychologist found out that I sometimes look sad too, would he take me on for a discount? Garden without pine cones. Another client from Switzerland, a man in his 60s, a former banker. He had a huge garden near his villa on Lake Geneva. Beautiful, trees, perfectly trimmed bushes, paths of white gravel. But one day he declared that pine cones on the lawn ruined the aesthetics. We hired a whole team of workers who spent 12 hours a day picking up every single pine cone by hand, without gloves, because with gloves they don't feel the real shape. People walked around with baskets, bending over again and again until they dropped from exhaustion. And the owner sat on the terrace, sipping wine and commenting, "Over there on the left, you missed one." I tried to convince him to install an automatic cleaning system or at least a net, but he said, "No, I want people to do it personally. Otherwise, what's the point of my money?" That phrase stuck in my head. For him, it wasn't cleaning, it was a demonstration of power. Concert for one song. We had one young client from London, the daughter of a billionaire. She adored a certain singer but didn't want to go to the concert because too many people, the smell of sweat and lines. The solution: she paid for the artist to fly to her home and sing one song. The cost, about £500,000 including flight, accommodation and fee. £500,000 to hear a song you can play for free on Spotify. I sat in the corner and watched as she listened to the live version in her pajamas with a glass of wine. She didn't even applaud, just said, "Thanks, that was nice." That's when I first caught myself thinking, for rich people, money really erases the value of events. Medieval village, wedding. But the record for absurdity was broken by a wedding we organized in France. The groom wanted everything to be like in the Middle Ages. We rented a castle, built decorations of a real village around it, hired hundreds of actors, blacksmiths, peasants, merchants. Everything had to look as authentic as possible. Guests ate with their hands, sat on wooden benches, and the actors portrayed life in the 13th century. But here's what killed me. For the groom and bride, they made royal chambers with air conditioning, Wi-Fi, and modern toilets. They wanted the atmosphere, but without the discomfort. The wedding cost over €10 million. And you know how it ended. A year later, the couple divorced because life turned out to be more boring than their wedding. When money becomes a drug. The longer I observed this, the clearer I understood. Money acts like a drug. At first, people buy ordinary things, expensive cars, jewelry, trips. But then they stop feeling pleasure. They need something new, more absurd, more rare. And that's when purchases like insurance for sneakers or psychologist for the cat begin. They spend millions to get back even a drop of emotion. But like any drug, it works worse and worse. I saw it on the clients' faces. Yes, they had villas, yachts, art collections. But when they were alone with themselves, they looked lost, as if everything they built was a huge theater and behind the scenes, emptiness. The strangest order in my life. But one story knocked me out for good. A client from London called and said, "I need to buy a feeling of childhood." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" He explained. He had a tough childhood, his parents were always working, and he never felt family warmth. And now, with billions, he wanted to recreate that feeling. We hired actors to play his parents. We rented a house in the countryside where he spent weekends with the family. They cooked dinners for him, asked about his day, watched movies together. I saw this adult man in his 40s sit on the couch and the mom actress cover him with a blanket. It looked both touching and horrifying at the same time, because no amount of money could replace a real childhood. It was an imitation and he knew it, but he kept paying anyway. My conclusion: the more I encountered such stories, the stronger I understood. Rich people really can buy everything. Everything except real meaning. They buy houses for dogs, therapists for cats, concerts for one song. But all of it is just an attempt to plug the hole inside.